Hello, my name is Kays, and welcome to another episode of Kays Labs. So what did the cat drag in today? It looks like a Korg DW-8000. The Korg DW-8000 is the bigger brother to the Korg DW-6000 that we fixed. In another set of videos, I'll post a link somewhere around here. And it's a great sounding synth, once again from the mid-80's. It's got like more waveforms than the Korg DW-6000. It's got 8 voices instead of 6 voices. It's got a built-in digital delay. I think it's a fantastic sounding synth, honestly. And if you keep your eyes out there, you can probably find it for, I don't know, like a reasonable amount of money. It's been going up in price, so like it depends. Now the person that sold it to me said that it doesn't work. It's been sitting in their garage and just won't turn on. And if I hook it up to power, switch it on and off, nothing happens. So obviously something's going on with this keyboard. And we're gonna open it up and take a look inside and see once again if we can figure out how to bring this guy back to life. Now, word of warning, as always, is that we're dealing with electrical circuits that can kill you. We're dealing with delicate electronic components that are very susceptible, for instance, to static electricity. If you're following along and you don't feel comfortable around those things, it's probably best that you seek the help of a professional to help you out to fix your DW-8000, because I wouldn't want you to make it worse than it already is, or worse off, I wouldn't want you to get hurt. Now, having said that, if you're ready to follow along and see if we can figure out how to bring this guy back to life, then keep right on watching and let's dig in. So I literally picked this guy up last night from a musician that was selling it to me. The guy told me that the keyboard has been stored in his garage for a number of years, and the last time that he tried to fire it up, it wouldn't power up. Now, the thing that I would like to say is that for being, like something that was stored in his garage, I mean, it's pretty clean. It's in really good shape, actually. I mean, it's unrealistic to expect any of these keyboards from the 80's to look pristine as if they just literally came out of the factory floor. But I mean, just looking at, the front panel, I mean, everything looks really good. There's no major scratches. I mean, it probably needs a little bit of like kind of buffing here and there, but like for the most part, like this looks really, really good. Keyboard looks good. I mean, I don't see any cracked keys on the bottom. I don't see any pieces of the case cracked. The little joystick, the tip is missing. This always goes missing. These things fall out really easily, apparently. The volume levers, I mean, they're a little scratchy, but I mean, overall, they don't feel too bad, honestly. I'm hoping that I just need to clean them up a little bit. The buttons, I am not gonna know if they need to be replaced until I'm able to like fire up the keyboard. However, just judging from the sound, I can tell that these are probably like the original switches underneath, which, after 40 years, they'll probably need to be replaced, or at least some of them will need to be replaced. So beyond that, the other issue that I need to address right away is that if we look in the back, we see that just like all of the Korg keyboards from that era, this also has this annoying 2-pronged power socket. And unfortunately, I don't really have any power cords that fit that. What I do have is the standard 3-prong power socket cords. And so the first thing I'm gonna do is just replace that guy with this guy. So yeah, that's the first thing I need to do, because otherwise I can't really power it up and see a little bit what might be going on with this keyboard. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is probably like disconnect the circuit boards from the power supply, and then fire it up and see a little bit what's coming out of the power supply, which is on this side. That's one of the first things that I like to do, is just to kind of see what voltage is coming out of the power supply, because if it's the incorrect voltage, then that could cause all sorts of problems, and it could damage some of the circuit boards. So it's really important to kind of make sure that the power coming out of the power supply is the correct voltage, after which I will reconnect the circuit boards, assuming that the voltage is correct, and then fire it up once again and see a little bit what's going on, see if we have anything on the displays, see if we have anything coming out of the outputs, and from that point forward, I'll hopefully have an idea of what I need to do to bring this guy back to life. Alright, so after unscrewing way too many screws, and if any of you guys watched the Korg DW-8000 repair, then you'll kind of notice like some similarities here, okay? I mean, on this side, you know, we have the transformer, fuse box, and the power supply, circuit board. Then in the middle is where, like, I guess like most of the processing kind of takes place. Here's like the firmware, EEPROM over there. This would be the voices. There's 8 voice chips as opposed to 6 on the DW-8000. And then at the top, you'll see like we have like very similar kind of layouts for like the control boards. This is like where like the sliders and buttons and display would be. Here's like the MIDI and input and output circuit board right there. And then the other big difference is this guy right here, where on the DW-8000, this would be an analog chorus. On the DW-8000, it's actually like a digital delay. Okay, so like the first thing I need to do is replace this power socket right here. Well, certainly not the best soldering job I've ever done, but as long as it stays in there and there is continuity, that's all I really care about. I like to put like this shrink tubing over it because you know, these are live once you plug them in. So I mean, it's okay when the case is closed down, but when it's open like this, it's kind of dangerous. So I think anytime that you can kind of increase safety, it's a good thing to do it. So before I hook this up to a power cord and fire it up for the first time, I'm just going to unplug these guys. So these are like the various rails that are supplying power to like all the circuit boards. So I'm just gonna like unplug them so that I can run my multitester and see what is coming out of them, because that's gonna tell me if this power supply is working correctly, if the transformer is working correctly, you know, if there's not any other problems like that. All right, so let's see if this is gonna work out. I got like my multimeter here. It's probably gonna be a little bit blurry, but hopefully enough for you guys to see. I wish the backlight would stay on, but it's just a temporary backlight. I have the power hooked up. The keyboard is switched on, so this is live. And on my laptop, over on this side that you can't really see, I have the Korg service manual for the DW-8000. So this is gonna tell me what voltages are supposed to come out of these pins. And so what I'm seeing here is on this first guy with the 6 pins, the first one is ground. And then the second one should be giving me -5 volts. So I'm just gonna put this here, and we do get -5 volts. The third pin should be giving me +5 volts. And sure enough, we're getting +5 volts. Once again, sorry if you can't really see it. There's the +5 volts. The fourth pin should be giving me 7 volts. And it sure is, like right on the dot. Then the next pin over should be giving me another +5 volts, and it is. And then the last one should be giving me 11 volts, but I'm expecting this to be a little bit higher because this is a non-regulated rail and there is no load on it, so it's giving me 15 volts. So that's okay. I mean, that's actually still within the margin of error here. So moving on to this 3-pin guy, once again, like the first one is ground. So the next one should be giving me -5 volts, and it is. There it is, nice and solid. And the third pin should be giving me +5 volts, and it is. And then last but not least, you probably can't see it, but there's like a really teeny tiny one here. So once again, like the first one is ground, second one is -5 volts, right? No, actually I stand corrected. It's positive 5 volts. Sorry, I misread the document, so that's correct. The next one should be giving me 0.6 volts. This is giving me 0.5. It's close enough to rock and roll. And then the last one should be giving me another unregulated 11.5 volts, which, as I said, is probably going to be higher than expected. It's like 15. But this is great. I mean, this is telling me that whatever is coming out of the power supply is spot on with what the service manual is telling me it should be. Rehooked everything back up. The power is hooked up. I'm about to fire this thing up for the first time, and let's see what happens. Keeping my fingers crossed, as I always do. A little too good to be true. We're getting nothing here, and nothing here. I do have my headphones hooked up. Let's see if we're getting that weird whistling sound. And we're not. There's absolutely nothing coming out. Now, if you ever get yourself into vintage synthesizer repair, then whatever I'm feeling right now must be feeling very, very familiar. And that is, I have opened up this keyboard, nothing looks out of place. I did all of the kind of like really obvious stuff, like starting with checking the fuse, believe it or not. Sometimes that could just be the problem. I checked all the voltage that's coming out of the power supply. Everything looks good. I reseated a bunch of these sockets just to kind of make sure that there was not like some corrosion or anything like that. I reseated the firmware right here. I basically just kind of did like a visual inspection, and everything looks good. I mean, this is like a really good looking circuit boards around, you know, like interior. I mean, there's like a teeny tiny bit of dirt and corrosion around here, but like seriously, this looks in great shape. I checked the memory battery just in case, and this guy has a nice charge on it. So everything would point to this keyboard just working, but it doesn't. If you watch the DW-8000 repair videos, there was like a really obvious sign that something had spilled, or maybe like the battery had like exploded, and there was like a lot of corrosion, especially right around like the processor. In this case, there's no sign of corrosion. There's no sign of anybody kind of messing around with this. I mean, there is like something that looks a little curious, which is, I don't know if you can see here, but like there's some sort of like kind of weird, you know, bypass or whatever is going on here, going onto this IC, and then there's like another thing that I noticed right here. This looks professionally done, so I mean, it's quite possible that this was done at the factory. Maybe they had like a slight redesign, that they figured out like a small issue with the circuit board, and this was their way to fix it rather than redesign the entire circuit board. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't look like somebody was just trying to kind of like hot rod or hack into this keyboard necessarily. But I do have to compare it to my working DW-8000 that I have right here. I haven't opened it yet, but I'm going to be comparing the circuit boards just to see a little bit like if that guy has these same little modifications. If I am trying to do like a bit of a, you know, investigative kind of Sherlock Holmes sort of reasoning to try to kind of figure out where to start, I would start from here. And the reason why is because this is like the central processor. Everything kind of happens here that is related, you know, to how this unit functions. If I had switched it on and the LEDs came on, and maybe like some of the voices weren't sounding, or they sounded distorted, or maybe like the output was kind of like crackly and weird, you know, then I'd be able to kind of say, okay, well, maybe there's something wrong with this, with the voice circuit board. Maybe there's something wrong with like the output circuit board. You know, if the display was like intermittent, if there was like maybe like some digits missing or something like that, I'd say, well, maybe the LED little displays are not working properly. If the digital delay was not working, yeah, you know, you see where I'm getting. I mean, basically, I'm just trying to deduce what might be the source of why this keyboard is not powering up at all. I keep coming back to this section because to me, when you switch it on and there's absolutely no activity on the display, there's no sound coming out of it, that tells me that maybe somewhere along the way, the processor is not firing up correctly. And on the DW-8000, what we ended up narrowing it down to is one of these 6116 RAM chips right here that was corrupted because obviously something spilled on it and kind of messed it all up. The DW-8000 has two of these guys, but I mean, you know, I don't want to just like desolder them and all of a sudden replace them without having a really good reason to do so, because I mean, to me, just visually, these look pristine. Maybe the firmware got corrupted somehow. I mean, that's entirely possible. So maybe one of the first things that I might do is swap it out with the firmware from my working DW-8000 that I have here and see if maybe that brings it back to life. I mean, that would be lovely, because I mean, that would be like a really, really easy sort of fix here. All right, so I swapped out the firmware. So this is the firmware that came from my working DW-8000, and I switched this guy on and nothing happened. So this firmware from my working machine did not work. However, when I put the firmware that was originally in here into my working DW-8000, as you can see, my working DW-8000 stayed working. So that tells me that there was nothing wrong with the firmware that was in this machine to begin with, and swapping out the firmware made no difference whatsoever. So the next step is going to be to swap this entire circuit board between the one that's working and the one that is here that supposedly is not working. However, there is a bit of a challenge to doing that, and I'll show you why right now. Okay, so we are looking at the circuit board on my working DW-8000. And there is a bit of a problem that prevents me from just simply removing this guy and putting it into the one that's not working and swapping it out. And the problem is that I did a modification on this guy where I put this little memory battery clip, and I hooked it up here because it seemed like a really great place to put it. So the problem now is the fact that these two guys are kind of interconnected, because I mean, I have wires going on from underneath here that are soldered into here. So ideally, I would remove this guy and this guy as well and swap them out on this keyboard. But there is another problem. And the other problem is that the power supply circuit board is hardwired into the transformer as well. So there's no easy way for me to remove this guy from this enclosure and put it into this one. All right, so here's where we're at. I ended up replacing this board and the power supply because I didn't want to disconnect the battery that I had hardwired to my main processor board. So what I ended up doing is just kind of like putting little clips that allow me to easily just kind of unplug the transformer from the power board, and then I can kind of lift both of these guys out of the keyboard, and that way I can kind of swap them out. So if my hunch is correct that on this non-working DW-8000, it's, you know, the reason why it's not working is because there's something going on with the processor board, and the other you know, the other circuit boards in the system are fine, and there's definitely something going on here. Then by swapping out this board from the working DW-8000, then technically this guy should work. So let's find out. I'm just gonna close the lid here, and let's see here. Everything is already plugged in. So here's the moment of truth. And look at that. We got the 8000, and all of a sudden, everything's working. Buttons are working. Everything's working. So what that tells me is that my hunch was right. Let me see here. We should have sound as well, although I suspect that the volume pot is a little funky. But sure enough, let's see if you guys can hear this. Joystick works, everything works. So basically, the processor board, or this guy, that is what I removed. There's something going on with this guy that is causing some problems. So then the next step is to try to figure out what it is with this guy that's causing this keyboard not to work, because we narrowed it down. I mean, we know that everything else works just fine. So it's here. The mystery is here. We know this guy works as well. The mystery is it's gotta be like somewhere around here. And the question is, what is going on? All right, so if anybody ever tells you that repairing old synthesizers is dull, they're lying, because it's anything but predictable. Every time that I have something that I think I figured out, when I go and test my hypothesis in some other way, then 9 times out of 10 I'm proven wrong. So this is my non-working DW-8000, right? And we narrowed it down that there's probably something going on with the processor board that is damaged, and that's why this unit is not turning on. So because of that, to prove that, I took out the processor board from my working DW-8000 and put it in here, and sure enough, this guy fired up and everything was working all of a sudden. And I was like, fantastic, this is amazing. And then I set out to like try to figure out what might be going on with the processor board from this unit. However, I thought before I start randomly replacing components, because I don't have an oscilloscope, so I don't really have a way to test components, so I was just gonna literally start putting sockets in and like swapping out components and hoping to get lucky somehow. But I figured before I start that whole madness, let me do one more test. And what I did is I took the processor board from the non-working unit that I figured this is not working, and I hooked it up into my working DW-8000. And the reason why I did that is because if you remember, when I took the good processor board, which right now is like sitting right underneath, I also brought in the power supply. Guess what happened when I went and turned on this keyboard that I figured, okay, now it's not gonna work because this thing doesn't work. Well, I'll show you. Yep, sure enough, it's working. What in the world is going on? Because technically this board is not supposed to be working. And when I put it into the working unit, it's working all of a sudden. So what I'm gonna do now is put it back into the non-working DW-8000 and see what happens. Because if when I put it back in here, it still doesn't work, this guy still doesn't work, then that tells me that maybe there's, no, not maybe, definitely there's nothing wrong with this board at all. And maybe it's a power supply issue. All right, so the processor board is back into the non-working DW-8000 after I took it out of my working DW-8000 where it was working just fine. And I'm just going to like carefully lean this back and turn it on. And sure enough, nothing happens. So this board works just fine in here, but does not work at all in this keyboard. Now, when I brought this board in here, then this was working just fine. However, when I brought this board in, I also brought in the power supply. And in this case, we are dealing with the older power supply, so maybe there is something wrong with the power supply for some reason. And what I really need to do is swap out this power supply for that power supply and see if I can get this keyboard to start, because if that's the case, then that will tell me that maybe there's something wrong with the power supply, and maybe this guy was fine all along. Okay, this is such a hacky way of doing this that I'm almost ashamed to show you guys. There's probably a lot of you that are screaming at the screen right now, But unfortunately, because the processor board from my good DW-8000 is connected to the power supply, because I did this little battery holder hardwiring it, I'm just kind of like having this kind of weird thing where this thing's kind of hanging off to the side, but really we're paying attention to this guy. So this is the power supply from my good working DW-8000. Now, if this works, it's all hooked up. So if this works, I'm just gonna feel like such an idiot. All right, let's see here. So I'm just kind of like turning it and looking at the screen right here. I'm just gonna click on. Here goes nothing. Oh my God, it works. Oh my God, I feel like such a moron now. I mean, all of a sudden it works. So it just kind of goes to show you that what I should have done is just kind of brought in this motherboard by itself. But if I would have done that, then I would have still assumed that the power supply, well, like this power supply that came with this guy was working just fine. But it isn't. Because all of a sudden, with the power supply from my other DW-8000, we got a perfectly functioning keyboard. So the processor board is perfect, but I was sure that this power supply was just fine because it was giving me correct voltages, but apparently it isn't. Apparently there's something going on here. So my guess is either it needs to be recapped, or maybe like the power regulators are not working. So here is the power supply that I think we narrowed down as the culprit as to why the DW-8000 is not working properly. Now, this power supply board is like a fairly simple circuit, especially compared to the processor board that we looked at. I mean, basically you have like the positive and negatives coming in from transformer, which then get rectified, go through a set of capacitors, go through the voltage regulators that you have back here. And the reason why these guys are bolted to these cooling fins is because they tend to get quite hot as they're regulating the voltage and bringing it down to 5 volts. And then from there on, it passes through some additional diodes and some smaller capacitors that are acting a little bit like to kind of clean up the signal, and then off it goes straight into the electronic components. There are like 2 big culprits that are likely to fail in these kind of circuit boards. One is the capacitors, and the other ones are these voltage regulators here in the back. Now, capacitors look pretty good to me, and I am not one of these people that are like, oh, let's recap everything. I think there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, change the capacitors. And it's like, well, there's got to be a reason for me to do that. I mean, yeah, I could change all these capacitors, but I mean, honestly, they might be just fine. I mean, I have a replacement here capacitor could kind of like, be a shoe-in for this guy. And I have like all the other capacitors sitting around. The question is it necessary? The other fail point is the voltage regulators, as I mentioned, and these guys are also like a common failure point. So we have like 4 voltage regulators here in the back. The first one is the 7905, which is basically taking whatever is coming in from the transformer and converting it to a negative 5 volt rail, okay, that we saw is coming out of one of these pins. And then we have several 7805s, 1, 2, 3, 7805s, and those are providing like positive 5 volts to the positive 5 volt rails. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out from this guy and just kind of check to see if there's any continuity issue between the first 2 pins and the last 2 pins, or the first and the last pin, and this appears to be fine. I'm not getting any weirdness here. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, once again, like we have no continuity between these guys, and same thing with this guy as well. Move on to the third 7805. Okay, and nothing here. Okay, and then the last one is the 7905. So this is the negative 5 volts, and we don't really have any. Oh wait, look at that. There is a short. So something tells me there's something going on here with this regulator, which I'm just gonna put my finger on it and flip it over. Corresponds to this guy right here, which is the 7905. This is the one that's responsible for the negative 5 volt rail. If not, I guess I could replace the other 7905 or 7805s. The problem is that I only have 2. So I really hope that this guy is gonna do the trick, because I don't have enough voltage regulators to replace all 3 of these guys. So I replaced this 7905 voltage regulator that now I'm not 100% sure if the original guy was really a problem or not. But nonetheless, this is a new regulator. The other ones for now I'm leaving as is. Going against my best judgment, I ended up recapping at least as much as possible. I mean, I don't have this guy, which is a 6800 UF cap. I don't have this guy, which is like 1000. And I don't have this tiny guy here, which is a 4.7 UF. Everything else though, I did have replacement caps, including this guy right here, which I also put like a little bit of hot glue on the bottom just to kind of hold it a little bit steady. I cleaned everything out on the underside, so I don't know. Like, I mean, as I said, I could replace at least 2 of these guys. I don't have a third one to replace it with, but for right now, I'm just gonna assume that they're okay. And honestly, like the only other thing that could possibly be wrong, aside from some diode failing, but that's kind of unlikely, would be one of these 2 capacitors, which, as I said, I don't have a replacement for. Let me see here if I can do this very carefully. Okay. All right. So repeat after me. Here goes nothing. Look at that. So apparently, I mean, I guess we'll never know 100% if it was one of the capacitors that I replaced, or if it was one of these 2 voltage regulators that I replaced. It was one of those things. So yeah, I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, the unit now powers on. Powers off. Uh-oh. False alarm. False alarm. This was my fault. In my eagerness to try to keep the case open with one hand, I accidentally ended up disconnecting one of these 2 wires from the switch. So that's why all of a sudden my power went off and I was like, oh my God, what did I do? So let's try it again, this time a little bit more properly. All right, so the moment of truth, if I rewired the switch properly, this guy should come on. And it does. Look at that. That's awesome. And I mean, it appears to be working as expected. Let me see here. If I play some keys, I'm gonna put like the headphones next to the microphone here. I mean, it sounds like this kind of terrible whistle that's coming out of the output. But this is perfectly fine, and the reason why is because, as I said, like by changing the battery, even if there were any presets still saved in memory, they were like totally wiped out. So I mean, basically there's no presets right now, so the unit is just kind of defaulting to this kind of default state, which is what's causing this kind of weird whistling sound. But if I load it up with some proper presets, then it should give a sound. All right, so I have the DW-8000 hooked up with the power and MIDI, and the first thing I need to do is change a couple of the MIDI settings. So I'm just going to go into parameter mode, go into 84, which is the channel number. I can see that like some of these buttons are not great, so I'm gonna have to replace them. So 84 channel number should be 1. So let's change to channel 1. 85 is the data enable. So I want to make sure that this is actually set to all, which is 2. And then 86 is the Omni mode, which I want to be off. So I'm just gonna put that to 0. And that should do it. So if I go back into parameter mode, now I have my SysX librarian here set up to go on the correct port. So I'm just gonna hit play, and there you go, we're getting the activity on. I don't have the keyboard hooked up to my speakers, unfortunately, so I'm having to do the little trick with the headphones, but DW-8000 is working, but there's still some things that I need to take care of. Well, join me in the next video where we try to figure out what else is wrong with it and see if we can bring it back to life. Thank you for watching.